think some really interesting points came out from there. Sometimes I sit and listen to this stuff, particularly I work a lot with Max, Tim and Phil Shelley and the others, and we're talking about food and how we stop food waste and what all that means. You think it's got to do with a waste manager. And so the waste managers that are here, it's got everything to do. The best way I can describe a waste manager, we're like wicket keepers. If you've never played cricket, it's one of the few positions where you can see the bowler, you can see the two batsmen, you can see the whole field, you can see how the ball's being delivered, and your job is to catch whatever goes past the batsman so that it doesn't go to the boundary. And I think as waste managers, that's what we need to be doing, becoming proactive. I think we're active now. We've got trained waste managers out there that know what they're doing, and we need to be proactive and engaging with people saying, this disposal bin I've got here has got to stop, and we need to find ways of either not putting stuff in it or putting it into a bin that's going to be recycled. And I think there's some really exciting work being done. And I think Samantha's point about feeling alone, I think, again, this challenge that we've all got, it's very easy to feel alone. But actually, there's a lot of people in the NHS. When I came to this role, people said, you must be absolutely mental. You think you can influence, the best part of 4 million people? And I was like, yeah, I think I can. But only this much each day. And then the results are enormous. And then we've started to build communities. So if you're not in the regional delivery group meetings and you'd like to be part of it, we cover food waste, we cover clinical waste and domestic waste, innovations, and we also cover energy. And the idea being is that we bring people from across the country. We started off in regions and just holding one of these meetings every 6 weeks in a region. Now what we've started to do is to bring 2 regions together, 2 or 3 together, because what we've found is excellence is pretty much spread around the country, but not always in the same region. And then we're starting to put people in touch with each other. So you're not on your own. People like Max and myself are there to support nationally, and we can put you in touch with people locally to you that have got similar problems and looking for similar solutions. And the brains to deliver this is in this room and in the NPAG and in the regional delivery groups. This is not something that Liam Hogg makes up. We've got a target and there's 1,000 ways to get there, and we can use all the brains that we've got in the organisation to drive that forward. Your turn. We've got 20 minutes to answer any question that you might have. If you have a question, put your hand up. Somebody will give you a microphone, and you can ask either or all of us any question that you want. Be nice.
Michael Hopkinson, I work for Department of Health and Social Care on circular economy work, which I'll be talking about shortly. Samantha, can I ask you, you talked about switching out your single-use items, including like the saucers.
Yeah.
Did you experience any kind of challenges from the suppliers of those products when you decided we're not buying them anymore, we're switching to something else? Were there any challenges there with that kind of relationship?
No, actually. So that's quite interesting. So no, we didn't. I suppose because we've moved to the Tetra, and because they obviously are also working towards being more sustainable, those single-use, they are ridiculously used up and down the country. I mean, we still have them in operation, don't get me wrong, we've still got to tackle patient feeding. So we are moving towards changing how we operate within patient feeding. So we're still purchasing them, so maybe that's potentially why. But these little small changes that we've done within our retail outlets are big changes, and they do go into the thousands. So the answer is no, we haven't. But we are looking to eradicate them possibly in the near future. Patient services obviously is a more vast challenge, but we are working towards that. So I really am looking forward to this development of change and reducing all those single-use items, and working with these wonderful people here as well. It's a I really do believe together we can make those changes. So yeah, look, no, the answer is no.
So sorry, just to add to that, I didn't have single use as part of our presentation, but there are a number of trusts around the country that have been on Samantha's journey and gone got rid of single use in retail, and there are one or maybe two now that have got rid of single use in patients. So it is possible. You know, they've gone. There are different mechanisms in which you can do that, right? Samantha's going for the charge option. There are rent options, and there are one where it gets included in the price, right? So there are ways in which you do that, and you do see waste go down. You see your costs go down. You see cutlery loss go down because the cutlery doesn't end up in the bin at the same time, right? So you see lots of benefits to that, and you see the waste environment around the bins, all that stuff. The bins are empty, right? Because nothing is going in the bin, right? And so you have to empty the bins less. You have less waste going into the waste compactor, all that kind of stuff. So the impacts are additional going through that process. So yeah, there are plenty of examples that we can give you around the country of people that have done that already.
Yeah, I'd add to that. There's a massive amount of single-use items, as you saw in the presentation I gave earlier on. It's really interesting to think about how they came about. So one of the things that we're working with Michael and the guys at DH, for instance, is to have a look at our capabilities in terms of sterile services, laundry and linen. And if you think back over the last 30 years, you know, when I first started working in the NHS, there was laundries up and down the country. Almost every trust had one. Most trusts had a sterile services. And slowly but surely, they've been closing and moving away. And interestingly, if you look at the march of single-use products, you can see as that's growing, the laundry and those services going back. So what's happening at the moment is that we've realised that single use is not the solution, and we need to look at other ways of elongating the life of things. I was thinking to myself, you know, always really strange when you go into coffee shops, because all their cups at home are made of china or porcelain. I don't think we need to have paper cups anywhere, and we can wash them out as well. And you know, actually, when you think about things like, for instance, glove usage is another one. During the pandemic, there were stories reaching us in the National Logistics Cell of people going around with 6 pairs of gloves on at a time because they were really nervous about what was going on in the pandemic. It never did any good. And then what we find is as the amount of gloves has gone up, people are not washing their hands in the sinks as much as they ought to. So now we have to flush the sinks every week for 3 minutes. And you can see how these things are all interconnected. So that as we start going back to not, you know, when you speak to people, gloves are not the solution for every time you're in contact with a patient. So as we start to go back to what we were doing 30 years ago, we're not only solving the problem of having reduced amount of gloves and reduced amount of pressure on the environment, probably not going to have to flush all the sinks because they're being used. Interesting.
Just one around blue plates you mentioned earlier. And about 5 years ago, we tried that, and we also introduced blue mugs as well. And we see now Bright talk about drink. The same is similar. We had about 20% increase in the average of patients. So we can see that as well. Patients have to drink much more having a blue mug than just a normal mug as well. And we felt that when we done that, we had seen about 25% increase. Also in food reduction in food waste as well. But it's about 5-6 years ago. But what did not went ahead is cost associated with the plates or crockery across the sides. So as you say earlier, if you have a leadership is not there behind you, you'll be able to implement that. And I felt that was not there. So you'll be able to have in 3-4 words, but not cross the trust. And that's what I think is fell down is the funds and also the leadership behind you and support you in doing that.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, right? There is an upfront cost to going to the blue plates, right? One of the biggest challenges around food waste when we started this journey 3 or 4 years ago is that many trusts didn't know their food waste quantity, right? And so they couldn't build that business case to say, I'm going to make this investment in blue plates and I'm going to save this amount of money from food waste reduction at the same time. And that's really the key bit that we've had. Obviously, the business case has to get through, right? And you have to have the leadership buy-in, right? And that's a challenge. And that's one of the places where we really want to help as a national team. If you've got a really good business case, but you're not getting the buy-in from board level, we're happy to come and help make cases for the right actions to happen. right? We've got case studies around the country for blue plates, we've got case studies for other things, right? And if you're wanting to make sustainable change, but you're not getting that business case through, we're happy to come and help. But going back to blue plates, yes, there's a cost involved initially, but so, you know, you've seen 20%, some people have seen 25%, right? The average is 15. But the reduction is there, business case can be made, right? And it's seen, you know, whether it's dementia ward or, you know, just a quick turnover ward where it's not necessarily dementia patients, you see that change. So you can make a business case. We've got a waiting list for trials, but if you do want to try it, we can help you. So yeah, we can help you with the business case. We don't have like an example one, but we can help come and help make that case with your teams if that's needed.
It's a great question. You remind me of something. So many years ago, I went to a conference and they were talking about food waste. So if you ask a waste manager, what's the cost of food waste? Chances are he's going to tell you it's about 300 quid a tonne if you're taking it off site. If you're processing it on site, it's probably about £300 a tonne. So what's the cost of food waste? £2,500 a tonne. Probably £2,500 a tonne. Because to actually pay for the destruction of the waste is about £300 a tonne. But first you have to buy it, transport it, prepare it, send it out to the customers, take it back, consolidate it, put it into a bin and send it. So actually, when you're building your business case together, it's really important that you take the overall cost of things and not just what the waste managers charge to get rid of it. I think it's really, when you think about that, and you also think about some of the other things that we're doing in terms of, here's another one, pharmaceutical waste. You know, it's the highest cost. It's about, depending on where you are, so if you're in an acute hospital, maybe £900, £1,000 a tonne. Think of what it is to buy it first. Think about the number of pharmaceuticals when they go into a clean utility room and people are stacking the shelves and they put the new pharmaceuticals in front of the old pharmaceuticals, and then the next thing you know, whoops, we've got loads of out-of-date pharmaceuticals. Think of the cost of that. You know, some of this stuff is not rocket science. It's actually being awake enough that things that you would do at home. So you wouldn't put the tin of beans that you just bought at the front, you'd put it at the back and use the ones that are about to go out of date. Great question.
What are we expecting food waste to go up by in price this year?
Well, when it's £2,500 a tonne, this was like about, if I think it's 5 years, it's probably 8 years ago. Think about what's happened with RPI since. So we expect it to probably go up at least 10%, maybe even more this year, food waste. So, yeah, it's painful, but what it means is the business case should be easier to get through. Any more questions? Yeah.
Hi Liam, Mark from Frimley Park Hospital. Going back to your original slide about reduction of incinerator waste, you know, predominantly majority of my waste goes to energy to waste off the M25 near Heathrow. We're very lucky we're going to be in the new hospital programme. What can we be doing looking forward towards our new sites to reduce the incinerated waste of our waste going forward, and how can we change our waste partners to help us to achieve those aims?
That's another good question. So if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, the 2020-60 would be fairly as it is now. So 20% of 155,000 tonnes of clinical waste would be high temperature incineration waste. But actually what's happened is there's hybrid processes, innovations that have come in the last 5 years that are now licensed. So definitely Stericycle and Sharpsmart, because I've seen it myself, and maybe others, what they're actually doing is they're taking their autoclave process, which is used for the second 20%, the orange bag waste, processing the pharmaceutical waste, not the cytotoxics, cytostatics, but everything else, processing that through the autoclave, that produces that picture I showed you, which is a clean flock. And what they then do is they take the condensate from that, which has got the pharmaceutical content in it, and they take that, which is in water now, and they inject that into their high temperature incinerators to control the temperatures, and then that flock is available then for reuse afterwards. So what that means is that top 20%, if you look at the best performing trusts in the country in terms of waste segregation, the waste that they're sending for high temperature incineration is about 5% of the overall waste stream, which is cytos, cytotoxic, cytostatic, and atomicals. The next tranche down are either sending for energy from waste plants that have that EWC code on their license, or they can send them to these hybrids. And what's happening is we're being pushed more and more into sending that waste to the hybrids, so we don't destroy the waste that we don't need to. So in the future will be to start having conversations to say about how much of the material are you covering. In the last couple of years, in fact, just before we brought the HTM out, I went and spoke to everybody in the supply chain, all the waste suppliers, and asked them, could they benchmark and give me their carbon factors for each of their processes? And they couldn't. So what we did was we used a combination of DESNZ figures, GHG figures, and a scientific paper from Chantal Rizan to pull together the carbon factors for all the clinical waste that we have. And we said that we would come back and review that. Last year, went back to the same guys and asked them the question, and they were able then to start to tell me what the carbon factors for their processes were. And what they confirmed is the carbon factors that we put down in their paper for the high temperature incineration and the AT waste were within magic numbers in terms of we were so close to what our guess was. But there was a real discrepancy with the offensive waste figures, which they didn't believe, because offensive waste is 21 kilos per tonne versus 450 or 900 kilos per tonne. That number has been reduced by DESNZ from 21 to 6. That prompted me to go and speak to DESNZ and ask them, did they expect that in the future, if we segregate our waste out and start reclaiming the materials, we would end up with a negative carbon factor? And of course, that's ridiculous. There's no way we're going to end up with a negative carbon factor. So we're going to have to review those carbon factors. The idea being is that we will end up with a granular figure for each of the suppliers for how far they're transporting your waste, the treatment process, any secondary or tertiary treatment that goes after that, or recovery, will all have a carbon process, and that will reflect the reality of what you're doing with stuff. So the challenge is stop burning waste and also to figure out a better set of numbers in terms of the journey to net zero. But if you speak to our innovation lead, we're getting guys coming to us probably 2 or 3 times a month with another process that in terms of waste treatment. And what we're trying to do is to field those and understand what will actually work, what will comply with the UK regulations, and what we think will work within budgetary constraints. But it's a busy picture, and keep your eyes on it. But you can start asking your supply chain, how much of the materials that we give to you will you recover as a percentage, clinical and domestic?
Gavin Thompson from South East Coast Ambulance. One of the figures you put up there, we all know, is a phenomenal figure, which is the glove waste. And we know that the pandemic didn't help with glove use, and there are gloves off campaigns. Is there any work being done and looking at the product itself? I'm aware of 2 studies where you pull out a glove and you get 6. The box then tears, the box is thrown away. You're grinning? I'll stop.
I'm only grinning because we've heard this story a lot, and you just think to yourself, what are we doing here? One of the great things about working in the NHS is our buying power is immense, and I think we're going to start throwing our weight around a little bit in terms of carbon and being green about stuff. So when you provide us with stuff, it will probably, no, not probably, to get to net zero, we're going to need to be provided with products that are made out of materials that we can whatever those 10 re's are. And if it's not one of those, the chances are we'll eliminate it. And so one of the things that we're doing with the supply chain now is to say to people, we love your products, we love them, but unless it satisfies these things in the future, we won't be able to buy them anymore. And I was in a very interesting discussion with a German pharmaceutical manufacturer, and we were talking about what the future is going to look like. And at the end of that, this is with the procurement guys, waste guys and procurement guys, match made in heaven. And at the end of it, their sustainability lead for the German company said, "We're so glad we spoke to you, and we're so glad the NHS is doing this, because unless you pushed us in this direction, we wouldn't have done it." So that leads me to believe we can have our cake and eat it as far as the stuff that we're buying. And I think you're absolutely right. It's not. We've been to the moon and back a few times. I'm sure we can figure out how to get gloves out of a box. Great question, though.
Hello. My question is actually for Samantha in the Royal Marsden Hospital. My name's Sophie and I'm the National Waste Manager for Spire Healthcare. So although that obviously I'm in the private sector, our sustainability goals are still very much the same. Where you've talked about your push for your colleagues and your patients to bring in their own containers and to eat in the canteens, are you offering any financial incentive for them to do that, just the same as like cost to do that if they bring in your own cup? Are you offering anything for your colleagues
we
to really push that?
Yeah, we do it right now. So anybody who does bring their own, we actually give them 40p off, and same for a cup. So both cup and box, if you bring your own, you get a money incentive, absolutely. But likewise, currently in our restaurants, if you don't bring your own, we do charge you 40p for that disposable box. So likewise, we're already trying to encourage our customers to bring their own, and they are. But believe it or not, that money incentive of charging them 40p has not, scared them away. They're quite happy to pay that 40p. Hence why then we've revised what we're doing and how can we go that big and bold step forward. And the answer was, let's just remove them. And again, that buy-in, really, I must stress it enough, is the engagements. You need to be out there, you need to be talking to everybody in that hospital, and actually we're working on doing that right now, but it has to be led from your senior team as well. And in your green plan, I don't know what your green plans look like, but ours is really, really heavy and making those positive changes. So yeah, look on our Royal Marsden page and talk to me. I'm happy to talk to everybody.
All of yous with a green plan, does it have a timeline of when you're going to do things on it? Brilliant. They didn't used to. And actually, that's really important, because when you come to, sustainability is really important in the NHS, but we're shouting in a very, very loud room to have our voices heard. And so that route, we need to make sure that we don't fall too behind. That's one of the reasons why with the ERIC data we've put it in the way that it is, so we clearly understand. And that curve that you saw in terms of carbon, we can break that down by region, by trust, by site, so we can actually work with the sites to make sure that you don't fall too far behind. Generally speaking, things don't follow the curve. It tends to be a little bit linear, and just to make sure that people know, particularly with things like energy, for instance, that requires a lot of investment, a lot of work before you start to see any of the benefits. And it's just important that people understand exactly where they are. So if you've ever worked with Gantt charts and critical path analysis, so you always know that as soon as you hit onto the critical path, you either need to do more operations in one go or extend the program out.
You were speaking about the ERIC report earlier on, and I noticed. Sorry, wrong chair. I was on a meeting that you were showing that, and our South East Coast was shown as having quite a high offensive waste stream in that, I think 2 years ago, and that's amazing because we didn't introduce it until last year, and it turned out that it was probably I've got to get the right terms, sanitary waste, hygiene waste.
Yep.
Is that separated now? Because I think that blurs the line between healthcare offensive waste and the hygiene box healthcare waste.
Technically speaking, if it's produced on a healthcare site, it will be healthcare waste and go into the ERIC data. But yeah, I understand that, and I think the ambulances was a really good case in point. In fact, I've got a big shout out to the ambulance guys, because this is a fabulous story. There was one ambulance trust was really struggling to get their 2020-60 targets, and they said, can you come and let's have a talk about it. So what I did was use the dashboard and pulled up all the ambulance trusts, and you could see that each ambulance trust had vastly different waste mixes across the clinical waste spectrum. And we said one of the consistent thing from this is the inconsistency in segregation. So they can't all be right and they can't all be wrong. So we started a program where we started to get together all the ambulance trusts up and down the country, and we wanted to do two things. and this is uber cool stuff. So the first thing is, okay, let's have a look at this. And we realised that majority of the waste that ambulances pick up, so majority of the waste that they generate from patients that they pick up will be offensive waste, because it's offensive unless it's known that the person is infectious. So, you know, when you get called out to an emergency, they're not telling you the infectious nature of the patient. They're just, so it should be relatively straightforward. So we started to work on that. And then the next thing is that we realised that if you bring your waste back to an ambulance base, that waste is picked up. So the orange bag waste, probably about £2,000 a tonne, because it's picked up in small bits. Whereas if you delivered that waste to the general acute hospital that you were delivering the patients to, which is a better practice, you're not carrying waste around, that orange bag waste would be picked up at maybe £450 a tonne. So we worked out that if we got ourselves into a position where we were segregating our waste in ambulance trusts as well as we were in the acutes that we're delivering to, the acutes, we could speak to the acutes and get them to absorb that waste into their waste streams, because actually when we looked at it, it was minuscule. They couldn't even measure the difference when they started accepting the waste. But that would save the NHS £2 million a year, I think is nearer 4. And that's a really cool thing. That's being smart with our money. And the ambulance guys have got together and they're really working hard up and down the country. And that's a real success story. We're not there yet, but actually the determination to get there is absolutely fantastic. There's 1,000 ways to get to net zero. Don't get hung up by one way or the other, or if people block you, we'll climb over it, go under it, go around it. When we mutate into resource managers, we'll be even more resourceful.
Thanks, Liam. Mark Ian. We did some really good work with our waste partner last year with capturing the blue wrap from HSDU, from the theatre wraps, and they took it up north and recycled it and created some really funky things out of it. But we're now looking at potentially using 3D printers at site to produce, things at site. Is anyone else doing that? Or is anyone else looking at that type of project?
That's it. Well, have you been following what I've been doing in my whole life? So
I haven't been stalking it, honestly.
So in the past, I was at Barts Health, and my boss was Fiona Daly. She is an absolute force of nature, if you've never met her. And I get things like, we'll say something, get rid of it, Liam, just get it done, okay. And one of the things that we didn't get done was we wanted to change from plaster casts to 3D printed casts. And this was about 8 years ago, I think. Maybe if I think it's 8 years, probably 10. And we were looking at the technology. So they were already out there. You can get 3D printed casts. They're like a lattice. And the benefits are, because your skin is open to the air, you actually will repair better, faster. And of course, you don't need a knitting needle if you've got that itch. You can just. And what we wanted to do was to be able to print these things, and then when you're finished with them, take them off, granulate it, print it again. That was the plan that we had in our brains. But we were a little bit ahead of what you could do. Recently, I was in Loughborough University with the guys there, and I was telling them about it. So I actually showed one. So my next door neighbour is a Polish engineer. He's an absolute genius, and he's into 3D printing. And I was telling him about these casts, and 2 hours later he came out and handed me one. I haven't got it with me, unfortunately. I handed one and put it on my arm, and he said, these are really easy. And I brought this with me to Loughborough, and I showed it to the guys there, and I said, it's a bit slow to get this printed. And he went, no, we had a planar 3D printer, so we could print that in under 5 minutes. So, and again, this is the sort of things that we can look at. So the technology is growing up around us. So there's a real possibility now that with the right machines and the right materials, we can print one of these, and when we're done with it, take it back, and they granulate it and go again with it. And literally, they just scan your arm within 5 minutes. Probably faster than it is to put a plaster cast on you. And there's an awful lot of exciting stuff like that around. So if you're a waste manager or a sustainability lead, keep your eyes open. And if you see something that you think, I haven't seen, contact me. I'll rob your ideas, no doubt about it, and share it with everybody.
Good morning. My name is Dara Piri. I'm with RAP. I'm a sustainable procurement specialist. So my question is with regards to the 3D printing, which you just described now. It's just a, I would say, a thought experiment. When we look at things like that, do we consider the unintended consequences, or have we thought about the wider scope of it in the long term? Like, just saying, because a lot of times with sustainability initiatives, we usually don't think that far down the line, and then we come back in the end to find some unintended consequences, maybe around energy use or something like that. So it's just a thought.
So I'm going to turn it into a positive unintended consequence. My lunatic neighbour, who prints all this stuff off, and when I say he has printed off a 737 cockpit fully operating in his man cave, yeah, and it all works. He likes Flight Simulator. Anyway, he prints all this stuff, and it's the usual colours: black, white, red, whatever. And then one day he printed this thing off, and it looked like wood. And I said to him, "Are you printing wood?" And he said, "No, but basically what it is, there's fibres in the filament, and so it looks like wood." So one of the things from the clinical waste, that treatment process was in, there's a lot of fibres that we can't do anything with. So now we're starting to ask people, can they dry the fibres out and put them into those fibres into a 3D filament and actually increase the strength of the filament to make it into something else? So you're quite right. We need to think about the downstream stuff. There's an awful lot of talk and work on the electrification of the NHS, and there's no doubt about over time, if you look at the electrical demands from a hospital, they've increased significantly in the last 15, 20 years as the processes and the treatments that we give to people become energy intensive. But yeah, you're right. We need to think about upstream, downstream, and the overall benefit or cost of something.